Now to China, and China's President Xi Jinping has opened the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit in the city of Tianjin. The summit is being attended by more than 20 world leaders, including Russia's Vladimir Putin and India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Xi delivered a keynote speech and presented a long-term economic and security strategy for the region, pledging to bolster cooperation with countries in attendance. Here's some of what President Xi had to say.
The current international situation is intertwined with turmoil, and member states are confronted with more arduous tasks related to security and development. Uphold fairness and justice, promote the correct view of World War II history, and oppose Cold War mentality, camp confrontation, and bullying behavior.
Let's cross straight over to our East Asia correspondent, Rik Glauert. He's in Taipei. Rik, we just heard some of President Xi's speech there. What were some of the key takeaways from his address?
So yes, as you heard there, Xi Jinping very keen to play up the SCO as a force for good in the world, using words like peace, stability, justice and fairness, and saying that it would oppose what he described as power politics and external forces. What he was presenting really was his vision of a new global order, one that will be more inclusive and place a greater importance on the global south. He's also been keen to undermine the size of the SCO, that the member states account for 40% of the world's population, and he's encouraged members to leverage the size of this market. This has been called the axis of upheaval. It's about showing a new bloc, a new framework, and new leadership to counter Western dominance.
New block of upheaval. How important, Rik, is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO, for China and the group of countries represented there then? What are they hoping to achieve?
Well, we have seen a copy of the declaration that's expected to come out of this summit, though it's not necessarily been signed by the members. In there, there's some talk about working closer together on security, a new centre to counter threats like cybersecurity, working together against terrorism and drug trafficking. Interestingly, there's also a mention on creating an SCO development bank to help member countries develop projects. But more than anything, this is about the optics. This is about Xi having the success in inviting world leaders, having that big family photo with them all in a row, and people seeing them coming to China. He's positioning himself as the great convener, able to gather all of these leaders and to lead the conversation at a time of international flux.
What about efforts, Rik, to position the CEO as a security guarantor? Is it taking shape as a military alliance?
Well, like I said, there is some talk about how the group could work together in terms of security, working together on shared threats like cybersecurity and that sort of thing. But there are no moves towards big defence agreements like that we see in NATO and that sort of thing. Interestingly, the group is starting to take positions on international affairs. There's talk in the declaration on the need for a ceasefire in Gaza and also condemning strikes on Iran by Israel. But it should be said that the SCO is a very broad umbrella of countries. You've got countries like Pakistan, and India that don't see eye to eye. And at the summit this week, we've had NATO country Turkey, but also Vladimir Putin from Russia, of course. But as I've said, the optics are quite clear that Xi is positioning himself as gathering all of these leaders together.
Now, this meeting is taking place against the backdrop of Donald Trump's, U.S. President Donald Trump's punitive tariffs. President Xi mentioned bullying in his address. What impact, Rik, are Trump's policies having on relations between the countries represented there at that summit?
Well, I think one relationship we've all been following quite closely is that of India and China. Of course, Washington imposed a whopping 50% tariff on India, which has soured India-US relations. And that has obviously pushed India to look for other economic partners. It's given Beijing an opening, really, that it sees itself as a bigger partner to India as it looks to hedge its bets economically. We saw Xi, Putin and Modi all speaking together. And some would say that Xi is seizing the opportunity to show how Trump's diplomacy using those tariffs can backfire, and that he is happy to welcome partners that feel like they are being shut out. India, of course, was once seen by the West as a counterweight to Beijing, but it seems that these recent tariffs have pushed Beijing and New Delhi closer together.
Rik, thank you. Our East Asia correspondent, Rik Glauert there in Taipei. For more on the summit and its significance for India, we're joined now by Sandra Petersmann, DW's bureau chief in New Delhi. Sandra, India-China relations have been in the spotlight of this summit, but Prime Minister Narendra Modi has also been meeting today with Russian leader Vladimir Putin. What more do we know about that meeting?
Well, we certainly know that the two of them spoke about the war in Ukraine. Modi expressed his hope that Russia and Ukraine will move forward to end the war soon. India's standard line in this conflict all along has been, this is not the time for war. Yet at the same time, India chose not to pick a side here. It never openly accused Russia, for instance, for the invasion in Ukraine. And before the meeting, I would also like to point you to some of Prime Minister Modi's social media post. He posted pictures showing him in a warm bear hug with President Putin. And then also the two of them were seen riding in the same car, smiling at each other to their conference venue. So I would suggest, at least judging by the images, this was really symbolism. The two of them together doubling down on the trusted and established relationship between Russia and India, and also President Putin has an invite to India later in the year. So there is no indication here that Prime Minister Modi is going to bow down under US pressure, as he is the main target of President Trump's tariff war.
Now, I understand the countries attending the summit have signed the draft statement that was being circulated earlier. What do you see as the key messages in that statement for India, Sandra?
Well, from an Indian point of view, it is certainly the, some would say, surprising condemnation of the Kashmir attack of April 22nd. Remember, it was an attack that killed 26 civilians, and most of them being singled out on the basis of their religion. It was an attack that India squarely blamed on its neighbor Pakistan. India spoke of cross-border terrorism sponsored by Pakistan. Pakistan is an SCO member, perhaps one of China's closest allies in the group, a country that China has always been keen to protect. All the more surprising it is that this condemnation found its way into the declaration, and a lot of commentators here in India see it as an expression of the thaw between India and China, given the US pressure that both of them face. India and China both are looking at a US-led global world order with some skepticism. They found it outdated and they find it full of double standards.
Now, the apparent thawing of tensions between China and India has been played up at this summit, as we've been hearing. How is all that being perceived in India, where you are, Sandra?
I think nobody here really talks of a fundamental realignment of relations. Everybody here is emphasizing that it seems to be the steady path that began last year already, that India and China obviously do see the need to cooperate with each other when it comes to geopolitics, as both share the same grievances. Like I said, a US-led world order, which both of them find outdated. Both of them want to see changes within the United Nations order, the Security Council. China certainly wants to see itself in a lead position globally. But here, I think, is something where the two of them differ still, and where India remains skeptical, because India in fact has no interest in a Chinese-led global South alliance that would then engage in anti-American politics, because from an Indian perspective, India needs them all. India needs China as its largest neighbor. India needs the US as its global trading partner and also as a partner in the Indo-Pacific. And India needs Russia to fulfill its energy needs and also for its weapons procurements.
So looking ahead, Sandra, what indications, if any, has this summit really given us about where India's foreign policy may be headed?
If I had to sum it up, I would perhaps say that India will most likely keep on doing what it is doing. India is not a country that enters formal alliances. India is not a country that puts all its eggs in one basket. India is rather going the more delicate way of balancing multiple strategic partnership against each other sometimes with each other. So I think India will keep doing exactly that. It has not criticized the US openly for its many derogative remarks when it came to the tit-for-tat during the tariff war. India is still hoping for the road of diplomacy there, but it has indicated that in its multipolar strategy it can work and will work with partners like China and like Russia.
Sandra, thank you very much. Our New Delhi Bureau Chief, Sandra Petersmann. Well, for more on the international dimensions of this summit, we can now talk with Lisa Louis. She's in Riga, where DW is reporting from after being banned from Russia. Lisa, Russian President Vladimir Putin has been making the most of this summit alongside India and China. What are his priorities at this gathering?
Well, Vladimir Putin obviously wants to shore up support from countries that he perceives as allies that have had his back since the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. The biggest one is obviously China. They're standing together, China and Russia, although some will be arguing that Russia has turned into a junior partner to China because it now more and more relies on economic support from China, but also so-called dual-use technologies. There are reports that China is delivering those to Moscow, which are then deployed in military equipment in Ukraine. Overall, though, this summit really is a diplomatic boost for Vladimir Putin. For him, another proof that attempts to isolate him through sanctions, attempts especially by the European Union, have not worked out.
Now, Vladimir Putin seems to be echoing President Xi's push for a new security and economic order, challenging the dominance of the U.S. How united are these countries on this vision?
Well, you know, there are a lot of countries with different goals, as we just heard. And in the past, this alliance has been rather fragmented. You know, it includes several countries that are longing for hegemony. But as one saying goes, you know, Russia and China, for example, can share their miseries, but not their happiness. So given that they see the US as a common opponent, they now seem to want to stand together more closely. They're both in favor of what they call a multipolar order, where these countries will, you know, play a bigger role, and not just the West and the US, as they are saying.
Vladimir Putin has been speaking about his war in Ukraine at this summit. Lisa, what's he been saying?
Yes, he mentioned that in his opening remarks. He was talking about, you know, the root causes of the war in Ukraine, saying that it wasn't caused by an invasion, by an attack by Russia, but by, you know, NATO expansion. We know that Moscow is opposed to President Zelensky. Moscow wants a pro-Kremlin regime, and they felt threatened, as they said, by NATO expansion, although obviously Russia started this war by invading Ukraine. So this is just another indication of how little Putin's position has really changed. And when you look to the West, to the European Union, that is currently talking about, so-called security guarantees for after a ceasefire or even after a war, hopes for such a ceasefire seem to be more and more remote.
Vladimir Putin, I understand, is also planning to stay in China for a few days after the summit wraps up. Lisa, what are his plans there?
Well, he will participate in the so-called victory parade to commemorate the end of the Second World War on Wednesday. And, this is another show of support, a show of military strength in the West. In certain countries, the end of the Second World War is rather remembered, looking to the veterans, looking to all the suffering. But this is, as I said, another show of, military strength to show that these countries are strong and should play an important role in the world order in the future.
Our correspondent Lisa Louie in Riga. Thank you very much.